Hello, I'm Joan Brown. It's my great pleasure to host this segment of the Marin Women's Hall of Fame show. Since 1987, the Hall of Fame has inducted over 140 Marin women of distinction, women who have made immense contributions to the county of Marin and its residents, as well as to the world beyond. Honorees have distinguished themselves in many fields: education, science, business, philanthropy, the arts, politics, law, philosophy, and religion. Each honoree has been a force for positive change in our community. It's a great privilege to acknowledge and to document their contributions. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Wanden Treanor, who's being honored in 2017 for her pioneering work in the legal and nonprofit communities. So, Wanden, it's great to have you today.
Thank you, Joan.
I know that you grew up in Marin County and that you've basically lived all of your childhood here. So would you tell us a little bit about your family and people who influenced your formative years and your early life here in Marin?
Well, thank you, and thank you, Joan, and for the Women's Hall of Fame for this honor. I think that, I'm very fortunate to have been able to grow up in Marin and certainly see that it was an opportunity to grow up in a very beautiful place. And my father actually came from Ireland, so I'm first generation. And I remember a story that he wrote a letter to my mother saying that he found this bucolic bohemian encampment on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, and that's where we would live. And it was a very different place in those days, and that certainly there was more of a middle class, and Marin County had a much more diversity, not necessarily.
What year was it that he had found this bucolic bohemian place about?
That would have been about 1954.
Okay.
Yeah. And it reminded him a lot of the coast of Ireland, so there was similarities that way. But I think also there was greater economic diversity, and that was something that made a big difference, I think, in where Marin County is today. But to start with the beginning, in terms of, I had the opportunity to go to Dominican convent in San Domenico because my parents actually both had been products of single-sex Catholic schools, and so that's the way we grew up, kind of in a very formal European way. We were to be seen and not heard, and we certainly did our curtsies whenever we met family friends. And it was a very different world in many respects, even from the world that some of my other students in my classes might have lived. But I think that in general, I feel that it was a wonderful environment for me, and certainly the Dominican sisters were important in my life in terms of commitment to service in the community, and that's something that has followed throughout. You asked about who were important people in my life, and certainly there was one person in particular that also grew up in Marin, a young woman who had been paralyzed at the age of 21 in a car accident, and she was a patient of my father's, and so he felt she needed a project and I needed some guidance, because at that point I had moved out from my family home, and my father and I were living alone together, and he didn't quite know what to do with me. And he had been in boarding school from when he was 7, so he didn't have any, sense of, what was a father supposed to do. So it actually was a great thing for me, and I think for the other woman, whose name was Julie Holter. And she actually had me at anti-war demonstrations in Golden Gate Park, and rock concerts.
And how old were you at this point?
Well, I was a bit young for it. I was 12. But Big Brother and the Holding Company and Janis Joplin, and I saw a world that I probably, sometimes I think I shared with you once, I might have ended up Republican in the world that I grew up in, and that was certainly my parents' world, but because of her allowing me to see up close what it meant to be disabled and the challenges she faced, that it caused me to realize that we really had to think about other people and be more inclusive, and certainly I became much more progressive as a result. So I'd say that, in that sense, she was the most influential person.
Now, as I remember, she was wheelchair bound?
Yeah, she was a quadriplegic, yes.
And you would call residents, call restaurants?
Oh, yes, that's true. And well, I took care of her Friday night, 5 o'clock Friday to 5 o'clock on Sunday. So whatever was needed from about when I was 12 to about 17.
Wow.
We would, before there was any awareness of lack of access for people with disabilities, we would call restaurants and ask if they were accessible, and if they weren't, we would go to them. And I would, all of 14 years old, interrupt a meal and ask some gentleman to help me because she had an electric wheelchair. And say, a friend of mine's outside and she can't come in, and would you help me get her in? And we'd usually need 3 men, and of course the maitre d' or whoever's in charge was very concerned, and they would tell us we shouldn't interrupt the meals. And I said, well, as long as everyone can eat here, if she can eat here, then they can eat here, then you need to do something about it.
That's incredible. That's incredible training.
Mm-hmm.
That is great. So you graduated from San Domenico, and you went to college, and then you became a Vista volunteer. So, and that involved, and I'm guessing cultivated your interest in affordable housing. And can you tell us about that experience and how that shaped your next step?
Yeah, I think, well, first I was interested in law from a very young age. I was 12 the first time I really realized, and I grew up where my father expected me to be a professional. So it was, I knew I wasn't good in math, so I wasn't going to be an accountant or a business person. And I felt fortunate that I was drawn to law. And he did a lot of expert witness work, so I would observe preparing for depositions and the like, and did attend some of the trial testimonies. So I got a job in San Francisco in a law firm that was rather prominent, and I worked on the Paris DC-10 air disaster, which was a significant case, and I was all of 18 years old, and I was looking at it like this was a great opportunity, and as I watched that summer, I realized that law in the major law firms was all about money and how much money people were making. And I was more about justice, and it turned me off to law, actually.
Interesting.
And so what was good is that I did get involved in public interest law, and I was able to see that you could use law to the advantage of others. And in doing that, I also became aware of the Volunteers in Service to America, which was the domestic Peace Corps at the time. And there was an opportunity to work as a community organizer, just like our beloved former president, Barack Obama, who was a community organizer, and learned a lot of skills in that, trying to get low-income people to come together to build their homes. And so we would find certain lots, and we would develop it through the Farmers Home Administration financing, and 5 to 10 families would have to commit to 25 hours a week and to work together to build their homes.
Do they still have that program, do you know?
There are some. The Central Valley actually had a lot more than Northern California did, but at this point in our history, I don't know what federal programs will remain to support them.
That's certainly true. So then after Vista, you went to law school, and that was a good experience for you?
Well, yeah, and I think part of it, actually, my Vista experience, actually because of construction, it enabled me to get my first job in law. And one might not necessarily make the connection of working in self-help housing projects, but my first interview after I finished law school, the lawyer asked me, well, do you know anything about construction?
And of course you did.
And I did, and I think he was surprised that I did. And so he says, well, tell me what a rafter is. And so I explain it. And so I won't go all through the various questions he asked, but it came down to, he says, you see that box over there? It's a construction defect case, and you take the box home and tell me what it's about, and you have a job. And so needless to say, I did. I read all the depositions, and that's how I got involved in construction defect litigation. And eventually that was in condominiums. And so I learned a lot about condominiums and plan developments, and that's what I ended up doing in my legal work, is representing homeowners associations. And so the part where Vista helped me is that pieces of paper, the contracts that the homeowners made with each other to commit time, not unlike the CC&Rs in the condominium. They have a lot of words on them, but they don't necessarily make people connected.
Right.
And so I'm able to use my work to keep homeowner associations out of court, to make sure the community functions. And in many respects, I'm more of a community organizer in my legal work as well.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So have you had any particular challenges or glass ceilings because of being a woman in the law?
Well, I think I chose a route that I didn't do the path that the corporate lawyers may choose, in part because of my experience that one summer, that I knew it wasn't a way that I wanted to work. But there were a few instances, and particularly with construction defect litigation, there were not very many women in that arena. And it wasn't uncommon that we would have 18 lawyers in a deposition and I'd be the only woman. And so in the process, a lot of the men talked about sports and you know what was going on in the sporting pages that day. And so I would always insert, well, tell me about yourselves, you know, what about your life? And I'd try and make them more human and make us more human, which I think helped in settling the cases as well. But in the process, I think I helped to educate some of the men in that environment that we worked. And so one day we were in trial, was starting, and one of the Superior Court judges would start the morning by saying, "Good morning, lady and gentlemen." And the next day it would be, "Good morning, gentlemen and lady." And by the third morning, one of the younger male attorneys, just before the judge was about to say something, said, "Excuse me, Your Honor, but could you please refer to us as counsel?"
Oh,
and to me, I thought it was a great example where taking the step not to say, "Don't tell me about your sports," that precludes 50% of the population, but to say, let's have a conversation that's more human. And in that process, he was able to help himself, the other lawyers, and hopefully the judge.
Great. So moving to community, moving from your professional deal, you have a staggering list of accomplishments and impacts in the county of Marin over the last 30 years. You've been the president of Planned Parenthood, the president of 10,000 Degrees, the president of what else? Legal Aid.
Legal Aid, yeah.
You've been a College of Marin trustee for 20 years. In the mid-'80s, you helped start Triangle Alliance, which was to encourage gay and lesbian people to take community responsibility positions and be elected. And I believe you were the first openly gay person to be elected in Marin County. It's just really amazing the breadth that you've done in this community. How has your community engagement affected your life, other than not having as many hours to have billable clients? And what's the quid pro quo for that?
Well, I think you've made a good point, is that I've always worked for myself after the first job I had, because I don't think any partner would tolerate the amount of hours I don't bill that most lawyers might bill. But I think it goes back to the training that I had in terms of community service and being of service to others and thinking of others before yourself.
Was that from the Dominican Sisters?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in large part that it really was a good grounding in that respect.
Did your family do community work too, volunteering?
Not particularly. I mean, it was more, I shouldn't discount it, but more, it was a different era and a different time in the culture where my mother was more involved with the symphony or the opera.
Which are good volunteers.
I'm not discounting it, is what I said, but I had a different approach.
Social justice.
Yes, I was much more social justice and thinking of people with less means and making sure that as with 10,000 Degrees and College of Marin, I do see where education is society's equalizer. And if someone has an education, obviously they can make a lot more money. And there's more opportunities available to them, to their spouse, their children, their extended family, because they then are the model for that family, because they can see that life has improved for them because of education. And in my world, obviously, education was assumed, and there was no question. It was whether I was going to be a professional. It wasn't whether I would go to college. It was what was I going to do after college.
And an enormous amount of your volunteer work has been in helping to get first in their family to get into college, or to even think that college is a possibility.
Right, which is what I love about 10,000 Degrees, because it really is, that's the focus. And I think that we all have that responsibility to make sure that, even though I remember my father saying that we did go to a private school, as he did as well, but it was everyone's responsibility to make sure everyone had an education. And I think, unfortunately, fewer people think that way, that as we have these conversations about charter schools and trying to use vouchers for religious schools, it's really taking away from the importance of public education. And that's where I think my work with College Marin and with 10,000 Degrees is really very simply connected and very focused on making sure other people who don't have the same opportunities are provided at least the chance to succeed either in workforce development or in education. The other areas, I mean, legal aid, obviously, it's very expensive to have a lawyer, and I think that there's some basic issues that, it relates to housing, domestic violence. People need representation, and legal aid is an important, critical component of making sure there is justice. Certainly the funding has been significantly impacted over the years, and I think there's less justice for all, but it's important that there be an emphasis there, and I saw that as a responsibility for someone practicing law to make sure that everyone at least has the opportunity for representation. And with Planned Parenthood, to me, every child should be a wanted child, and that no woman's career or potential should be stopped because of a mistake she made or a shared irresponsibility. And I would hope that one day we would never have to talk about abortion, but my feeling is that it's one of the many areas of medical service that should be available to a woman to make sure that she can independently decide what her future is going to be about. And so that's my commitment to Planned Parenthood, is that every child be a wanted child, so that no one is having children they don't want, but that also the mistake of a woman and her partner for not thinking about what their responsibilities are shouldn't result in destroying the woman's future. So that's my commitment, and where I was grounded in my work with Planned Parenthood.
So I know that in every one of those organizations, you have been the kind of known and talked about as the conscience of the board. That in Planned Parenthood, it was whether you combine or close. That in legal aid, it might have been shut down. That 10,000 Degrees, it was really putting the emphasis in expanding it, redefining the mission, and including Sonoma County for First and Family and so on. And everyone who I talk to about your stellar career in volunteerism and being on the boards is that people talk about you're really being the conscience of the board, and that you have been the voice that keeps coming back. What job are we in? What's our mission? What are we going to do? And what an incredibly valuable and pivotal role that is in the nonprofit community. So would you share one example where your leadership in this kind of a situation, like just 30 seconds, like if Wanden Treanor hadn't been there, just tell me, if Wanden Treanor hadn't been there, where would Planned Parenthood Marin be today?
Well, that's a good example, because it doesn't exist because we no longer have Planned Parenthood Marin, Sonoma, and Mendocino, which I was actually the last president of that organization, because we got to a point where the reimbursements from the state for services provided by Planned Parenthood were not able to keep pace with the costs and the increased costs of running the various clinics. And so we had a clinic in Mendocino, and we had one in Sonoma, and we had the San Rafael Center. And we were doing a lot, stretching a lot of money and doing a lot of fundraising. But the reality was we weren't able to really fulfill the mission. Mm-hmm. And I remember one board member saying it was either mercenary or missionary. I mean, we had to make a decision.
Wow.
And we were either going to have to close 1 or 2 clinics, which would have meant we would only have been left with San Rafael, or we had to look at other types of arrangements. And so in that process, we did look at merging with other Planned Parenthoods in the Bay Area, and worked very hard with San Mateo and San Francisco and Alameda, and really spent a lot of time making sure that there was a continuation of services. And I'm happy to say it's gone through lots of iterations in the last 20 years, but the reality is there are services. The 2H clinic is there, it's up, it's running, it's thriving. And the same is true for Mendocino and Sonoma. And the Northern California Planned Parenthood affiliate is one of the strongest and largest in the country. So I do think I played a pivotal role in making sure we didn't close the clinics and that we had to make some very difficult decisions. But it was, in the end, it's what was needed for the patients.
Good job. Good job. What, in your opinion, would you say are the top 2, 3, or 4 greatest needs in Marin County right now?
Well, I think that affordable housing and homelessness, we can't, as I said, the Marin I grew up in had a middle class. Right. And the reality of, I'm Irish, so I look at the obits. and you look at the stories of people who, as they're ending their life, what their family has to say about them. And if you opened the paper 20 years ago, you would have seen painters and contractors and a much more diverse group of people, that they were proud that they were mechanics. And we don't have that today. It's very much a place where only those who are very wealthy can afford, particularly now. I know I wouldn't be able to have the home that my spouse and I have together because I wouldn't be able to afford the down payment, let alone what the monthly payments would be. And so that's a sad place for the county to be, and I don't think it's reflective of a healthy community. So I see affordable housing and addressing the homelessness issue as critical. And certainly...
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Last Friday, I was at an all-day seminar about the homeless situation and the idea of home first, of providing the housing and doing that. And how you get that to happen in Marin County is a huge mountain to climb, and yet I believe so deeply in my bones that that's where we have to go. Mm-hmm. We've got to break the back of that. So I'm glad that's one of your main issues too. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think also, the status of women and girls. I think that part of what the Hall of Fame does is it showcases for young girls mentors and women to understand their history and to see what their potential might be as a young girl, to say one day I might be a lawyer or one day I might be a judge. And we need to make sure that, especially with social media, the girls' image of themselves and what's expected of them, that I feel I grew up imbued with self-esteem because I was in a very strong, supportive environment of young women. And I think that we need to make sure that happens, and that every girl is safe, and that we're addressing the issue of human trafficking, which is not just a problem in Southeast Asia. It's a problem right here in Marin. And it needs to be a priority that women are safe in their home and they're safe in the community, and it needs to be an ethic that young boys learn from the very beginning about how they have to respect women and respect all people. And it's not just men, but I do think that there needs to be a change in how we look at it. I mean, to go off on one subject, I think one has to look at football, and you look at boxing, and you look at all the things that really are touted as important sports for men. They lack that sense of community, that working together, and that it's much more, in my view, more violent. It's like it's okay. And you look at what's happening with the football players today and the number of domestic violence claims against them. I don't think you can separate it. It's a cultural issue that we have to change.
So we have about 30 seconds. What advice, it's flown by, what advice would you have for young women, particularly, about being fully engaged in community and supportive community and each other, and how and why they will benefit from making time in their overly busy lives to take this on?
Well, I think what first and foremost, we all need to see boys and girls as equal, and that the boys should not have an additional privilege. But I think for girls to feel strong and independent and know themselves as strong individuals is really what's critical.
Thank you, Wanden, for sharing your stories from your incredible life with us. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in. The Marin Women's Hall of Fame is a project of the YWCA of San Francisco and Marin. If you would like to learn more about the Hall of Fame and our honorees, please visit www.ywcasf-marin.org. Thank you so much.